Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 16 of Black Cat Theology. This is Dr. Peter Dillard. I wish everybody a Happy New Year, and I hope that all of you had a joyous and blessed Christmas. It's been a while since I've uploaded any lectures in this series because I too was also celebrating the holidays with my family and loved ones. So now that we're in 2017, I think it's important for us to get back into the swing of things. Today is one of the more pivotal lectures in the series because we are going to put together the various things that we've been saying over the past several lectures in order to explain an important aspect of Gelassenheit theology. Specifically, we've been thinking about how the Gelassenheit theologian might explain or give an account of the way in which this holy presence, this objective presence, something out there that's not though any particular being or even being itself, but nevertheless is something out there, this holy presence, how might that enter into human decision making in a very intimate way? How might that guide us in making prudent judgments or decisions under its influence? It's very important for us to do that so that the holy isn't just something irrelevant sort of hanging around out there that doesn't have any relevance to human life. So in pursuit of this project, we have identified various aspects of Gelassenheit theology, and now what we want to do is put them together in sketching this account of how decision-making is possible under the influence of the holy as it is understood by the Gelassenheit theologian. And I'm going to do two things, therefore, in the lecture. First of all, I'm going to summarize the various elements that we've discussed over the last few lectures, and then I'm going to put them together by giving some very specific examples of how decisions might be made under the guidance of the holy. So let's begin with the various aspects we've identified over the last few lectures. The first one was this notion of thoughtful openness that we took from Heidegger. And thoughtful openness is a situation of relative clarity in which we may find ourselves, where we are free, relatively so, for the most part at that time, we find ourselves clear or free of any kind of philosophical confusion or metaphysical conundrums that might disturb us or that we might have been in the grip of previously. We may have reached this situation of thoughtful openness through deconstructive analysis, where we thought through certain philosophical problems and they no longer have a grip on us right now. Or we may just be fortunate enough to find ourselves, and we may just be innocent at this particular moment in time, this place in time, find ourselves fortunately innocent of any or free of any confusion along those lines. Now, Heidegger also calls this a situation of thankfulness. The thankfulness here is not directed towards any particular being or person or God. It's simply, well, I'm grateful to be in this situation, or we might be grateful to find ourselves in this situation of relative clarity. So it's a kind of thankfulness as well. And it's sort of the initial situation or the opening situation in which we then may make a decision guided by the holy. So it's sort of the opening wedge, the entering wedge. The second element we discussed was the notion of a Crackle Clock. And a Crackle Clock is a relatively stable thing, a being, or even a non-being, to which we may return over and over again throughout the course of our lives, and that helps us to become aware of actual changes that have transpired in our lives since the last time we were with the Crackle Clock. Or also, it might help us to become aware of possible changes in the future, things that might happen in the future. So it focuses our awareness of actual and possible change. Now, it could be, as I said, a being. It might, for example, be a cabin in the woods or a pond in the mountains. It might be a friend with whom we visit over and over again throughout the course of our lives, and each time we become aware of things that have happened and things that might happen. But it also could be a non-being. The example that I gave was this poetic figure of the stranger that occurs in the poetry of Georg Trakl, and that's why I took the word the term Crackle Clock from him. This is the figure of the stranger, who is a fiction. That's not anybody real, but is a definite figure, a poetic figure. And we might return to it again and again over the course of our lives when we read the poetry, and that might help us to become aware of changes that have happened since the last time we read poetry about the stranger, and things that might happen, changes that might occur between now and the next time we come back to it. And I'll give some examples of that later. So that was the second element, the notion of a Crackle Clock. The third aspect we discussed was a kind of spatiality. It's a kind of reflective distance where we step back from the spaces of activity in our lives. In other words, the spaces where we undertake certain projects like washing the car or going shopping or taking care of the kid, making sure that the kids get off to school or whatever. We sort of step back from the various spaces or regions in which we undertake these projects and activities, and we have this kind of more detached awareness of the space of all spaces, where when we're thinking about that space, we're not really then engaged in any particular project. We're sort of reflecting on the whole thing. We're reflecting on our projects in toto. And so this kind of reflective distance is what I called Hölderlin's spatiality, because there are places in the poetry of Hölderlin where Heidegger is talking about Hölderlin especially, where we have this intimation where, for example, Hölderlin is asking us to think about the sky, where we're stepping back from the regions of immediate activity and having this more reflective awareness of space that has a calming effect. So that was the third component. And then finally, the whole experience of Gelassenheit itself, the overall phenomenon of Gelassenheit that we began discussing quite some time ago, but that became focused for us through our remarks on Rudolf Otto and his contribution to the phenomenology of the holy. Gelassenheit is a kind of energized tranquility that Heidegger discusses, a kind of energized, tranquil dwelling in the world. And we can already see there that within the overall phenomenon of Gelassenheit, there are these two notes. One is a kind of energy, and the other is a kind of tranquility. And remember that for Otto, the energy is a kind of agitation or a kind of an awesomeness at being, or even a kind of fearfulness in the presence of this holy thing, holiness out there, the holy, whereas the tranquility is sort of the satisfaction of our yearning to be with it. So there's a kind of a push-pull there between this awfulness, this feeling of being almost a little afraid of the presence of the holy, and then this kind of satisfaction, this deep sense of satisfaction we would have if we found ourselves united with it, because that would satisfy our desire to be united with this fascinating presence. So there are these two elements. Now, the second thing that we want to do today is to see how these elements come together in specific examples of making decisions under the influence of the holy. And what I want to say is that the basic sequence of decision making here is that when we are in a situation of thoughtful openness, and through a Crackle Clock we become aware of certain changes that either have transpired in our lives or that may occur, then we hold that up. We step back from our immediate spheres of activity, the spaces, the everyday spaces in which we pursue our various projects, to this more kind of detached spatiality of Hölderlin spatiality. And depending on how these two elements of Gelassenheit interact, we can then decide whether to embrace a change or to reject it, or maybe even just to remain indifferent to it. So let's look at some very specific examples. And in the first example, I want to give an example where we are guided by the holy not to embrace a particular change. So how might that go? Well, let's go back to the stranger. let's suppose that that's our Crackle Clock, and suppose that I find myself, after having, for example, engaged in some deconstructive philosophical analysis, I find myself in a relatively clear state, free from philosophical confusion, this sort of thoughtful openness. And so I go back, I haven't read, let's say, some of the poems from Crackle in many years, and so suppose that I go into my study and read some of that. And as I read this, I become aware of the fact that the last few years of my life, I've been very much involved in the community and in interacting with other people. So I've been very, very social. And I haven't had a lot of time to myself. And so in the course of reading this, I become aware of a possible change, something that might happen differently in my life in the future. Namely, maybe I should go off and become more, and have more solitude, become more solitary. And maybe even the idea occurs to me that I should go out and maybe build a cabin somewhere out in the woods and spend some time there, apart from everybody, right? And this happens, when this is happening, I'm not in some particular space of activity where I'm pursuing a project. I'm in this kind of reflective space where, the possible region of the forest, in contradistinction to the regions of where I've spent all this time in the past with people, that sort of shows up for me. But I'm sort of detached from it because I haven't committed to anything yet. Now, how does the decision get made? Well, suppose that I very prayerfully wait for the holy to give me some guidance here. How might that happen? Well, suppose that I start to have a feeling of energy, great energy, when I think about this possibility of being more solitary and maybe even building a cabin out in the woods. But this energy, there's no tranquility associated with it. It's just energy. It's just kind of an agitation. And that's a very negative feeling, or I don't feel comfortable because there's nothing but agitation there. So here we have part of glass and height without the other. We have the energy without the tranquility. And so since I don't really feel all of that coming together, I might hesitate and say, well, wait a minute, I need to think about this some more before I undertake this new project of becoming more solitary, of distancing myself from other people, maybe even to the point of becoming a hermit in the woods or something like that. So here, the holy, the aspects of glass and height, and in particular, the fact that we have one without the other, is guiding us away from a certain positive change, or a certain change in the future, a possible change that we have become aware of through a Crackle Clock in this kind of reflective distance of Hurlbut and spatiality. So that's one. Let's take another one. There's another way in which we might become not predisposed to embrace a change. So let's suppose that Anna goes to a summer cabin every year as part of her vacation before she goes back to school. And this is a ritual with her. So the summer cabin here and its environs are serving as her Crackle Clock. Because every time she goes back there, it allows her to think back over the past and see what's changed since the last time she was there, and also to look forward and see what might change in the future. So let's suppose that when she goes there this August, she becomes aware of the fact that since the last time she was there, or maybe over the course of the last few times she's been there, she's now using more electronic devices than she was in previous visits. So she has her laptop there, and she has her cell phone there, and maybe she has an iPad there, and she's spending a lot more time with these devices than she was previously. So that's a change, an actual change that has transpired over the course of the past, maybe since the last time she was there. So then she wants to know whether she should embrace that change or reject it, or maybe just be indifferent to it. Suppose then that she finds herself at one point, in the cabin, and all of a sudden, maybe she's typing an email or something, and all of a sudden she sort of steps back from that. She becomes aware of this surrounding spatial expanse. Maybe it's at night and the crickets are chirping, and it's like this ocean of sound around her that draws her attention away from the immediate sphere of her activity into this more encompassing space, which we called Hölderlin spatiality. And now she also, when she's in that kind of reflective distance, thinks back over this change that's transpired in her life. And so she wants to know whether to embrace it. And as she does that, she realizes that she feels very comfortable, tranquil with the fact that she's, this change has transpired. It doesn't upset her, but that's all she feels. There's also no real excitement about it. There's no energy with it. It's sort of becoming a kind of complacency. There's comfort without stimulus. There's comfort without energy. And that becomes a kind of blandness. And now, because that aspect of Gelassenheit is there, that is the tranquility, but without the energy, now this blandness is a sign or an indication to her that maybe she should not embrace this change. In particular, she should be more sanguine and careful about the fact that since she was at the cabin the last time she was there, she has become more technologically involved to the point where she's spending a lot more time doodling around with electronic devices. So here, these first two examples are ones in which a particular change, either one that's actually transpired in the past as with Anna, or one that might transpire in the future as with me, in the first example, that change is rejected under the influence of the holy. Now, let's take a third case. Let's be rather brief here. This is a case where something has changed, but the person is indifferent to it, doesn't really feel anything. Let's go back to Anna for a minute. Suppose that she becomes aware of the fact that since the last time she was at the summer cabin, there are a lot more airplanes flying overhead. Okay? And suppose when she meditates about this or thinks about this, again, the summer cabin and its environs are serving as a Crackle Clock through which she becomes aware of this change. The change is focused for her awareness, her phenomenological awareness. And once again, she steps back into this reflective distance apart from any immediate sphere of activity or any particular project, any immediate space in which she's pursuing a project. And she doesn't really feel anything. Oh, well, I don't really feel agitated, nor do I feel comfortable. I don't really feel anything in particular. Well, then, under the influence of the holy, she would be justified in saying, well, I'm indifferent towards that. Yes, there has been this change that has transpired with more aircraft flying overhead, but it doesn't make me feel agitated without any calmness, nor does it make me feel sedate, calm, without any agitation or energy. It just leaves me kind of blank or neutral. Okay, well then that's a case where maybe she shouldn't worry about that change. She should just remain indifferent to it. It's fine that they're flying overhead. I don't really need to do anything about that at all. Finally, let's take a case where everything comes together and a particular change is embraced. And here I'll go back to the stranger example that I gave at first in the very beginning, but I want to change it a little bit. Suppose that this time, when I go back and read Crackle's poetry, maybe it's been many years since I've read the poetry pertaining to the stranger. And so I become aware of something in the past, but this time it's a little bit different. Suppose it's the other way around, and I become aware of the fact that, well, I've been very much engaged in my studies, I've been very much engaged in my own personal projects, focused on my own aims. And also, I become aware of a possible change in the future as I step back from the space of my projects, those in which I'm pursuing my own personal ends, and sort of occupy this more reflective space. I become aware of a possible change in the future. I might go volunteer somewhere. I might go volunteer and work with children or with homeless people, or do something that will connect me to other people in a way that is advancing their aims, not only mine. So there may be a more community involvement in this case. And now, the phenomenological elements come together all at once in a very different way. In other words, when I contemplate that possible future change in this kind of reflective distance, the change that I've become aware of through the mediation of the Crackle Clock, in this case the figure of the stranger, now I feel both energy, excitement about that, but also a kind of tranquility, a kind of the possibility of satisfying a deep longing that leads to peace. And so energy and tranquility come together in energized tranquility, which is a very positive and powerful, motivating experience. And I realize that the holy is guiding me to embrace that change and to volunteer, not simply to continue my past policy of focusing mostly or even exclusively on projects that serve my own end, but to take up a future project that will help others. And I may then proceed to reflect on various possibilities there. And again, under the influence of the holy, some of those possibilities may be rejected and others may be embraced. For example, I may feel, well, maybe instead of working with, maybe instead of working with the homeless, because we already have a lot of people doing that, the holy leads me to embrace the change of working with children because there are a number of children in the community who need that kind of help, and I'm in a position to do it. So that can go on. Now I want to conclude with one observation, and then I want to look forward just a little bit to what we're going to discuss next. These various elements, when they come together in the ways I've been describing to help us make a decision by either embracing a change or rejecting it or maybe remaining indifferent towards it, these things may be happening sequentially, or they may be going all at once. It may be that I step back into the spatiality first and then I go to the Crackle Clock, or vice versa, or maybe it sort of happens all at once. The point is that when this kind of decision making, and it's not the only one, I'm not trying to say that this is the only way we should think about the holy, but I believe it's a powerful one. And it can be a kind of spiritual exercise in which we draw closer to the holy, and the holy draws closer to us in a way that enriches our lives. It can be a kind of spiritual exercise that helps us to make holy decisions. And as long as all the elements are in play, it doesn't matter exactly how they fall. I have given some examples of this in my book, where they fall out differently, but they're all there. And so that's what's most important. A couple of other real quick things. What we want to do next time, looking ahead, we want to begin to think about a couple of other issues. Remember that one of the questions we raised about glass and high theology is, well, what does this have to do with traditional or beliefs or doctrines of Christian orthodoxy, like the incarnation of Christ and his passion, his resurrection, the Trinity, and so forth? We want to begin to examine next time how what we've said today is pointing towards a kind of Christological emphasis in this, because it shows that the holy and the human are suited for one another. It's not like the holy and the human are alien. If they can come together in this sort of intimate form of decision making, this spiritual exercise, that shows us that they're kind of suited for each other. Well, they are suited for each other. And they may come together in a preeminent way in the person of Christ. We want to talk about that a little bit next time. And in the near future, we also want to come back to Heidegger. And I would like us to look at his commitment to National Socialism, something that I mentioned a long time ago that we wanted to discuss. And I think today, especially given the current state of Heidegger scholarship, as we become more and more aware of Die Schwarze Hefte, the black notebooks, we need to address this. So what is this kind of philosophical preoccupation that Heidegger has with National Socialism, particularly in the year of his rectorate from 1933 to 1934, and that even has echoes later than that? What is it? What's problematic about it? And how can the position that we are developing here militate against it and protect us against that kind of thinking and other kinds of dangerous thinking? That's something that we want to come back to. So, that's all for today. Again, I wish everybody a Happy New Year. I hope that you will continue to think about this material. I think it's very important for us to do so. Again, I always welcome your questions and your feedback. I will try my best to answer any questions you may have, or to be helpful in any issues that you bring up. But until next time, this is Dr. Peter Dillard signing off for Black Hat Theology. Thank you for your time.